available as soon as possible after the meeting has concluded. We welcome the use of the Welsh language at meetings, but to date I've had no request for people to speak Welsh today, so we will conduct the meeting in English only. Please, members, can you refrain from using the chat function, and instead please use the hand icon to indicate when you want to speak. Remember to keep your microphones muted when you are not talking, and please do not interrupt discussions until you have notified of your intention to speak. So good morning, everyone. Geraint, do we please have any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. We've got apologies from the exec member, Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Geraint. Do we have any declarations of interest, Rebecca?
I'm not aware that members will have any declarations of interest for this item, Chair, but if you do have any through the course of discussion, or Councillor Clarkson, you've just indicated.
I just wanted to ask, do we need to declare for members of community councils?
We'll note those down if you just want to,
note it down.
Record those. Oh, Geraint has already got a note of those. Have you, Geraint, or no? No, if you could just declare them, which community councils.
Pontypool Community Council for myself, please.
And I think Steve Evans wants to come in.
Yeah, just to declare, I'm a chair of Thornhill Community Centre, and I'm also a volunteer, so that's in the report anyway. So yeah.
Okay.
I'm a trustee of Costa, and obviously a volunteer up there as well, or a volunteer trustee.
Chair, I don't know if it's worth Lynn. I don't know if it's worth notice. I'm involved with Blaenavon Workman's Hall as an observer, and I'm also a volunteer there as with Community Museum in Blaenavon.
Most of us have probably got volunteering responsibilities, so can we all declare that as an interest? Yeah. Maybe.
Okay. I think that would be universal across the board. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. We're moving on now.
Sorry to interrupt. I don't have any volunteering duties.
Okay.
I don't have anything to declare there.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Geraint, have you got that noted? I think Lucy wants to come in.
Yes, sorry. I can't seem to operate my reactions button or my mic thing, but probably I need to declare that I'm a trustee for ABLE, based in the centre in Upper Cumbrae, the Nunt Brown Centre.
Right. Thank you. I think that, Geraint, if you could note that, that would be brilliant. Okay. We're moving on to item 3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of the 10th of this year, and also the 9th of November. Do you have any issues that you want to bring, or are you happy that the minutes are fine? No issue, right? So on both the 2 meetings, the October and the November, are we satisfied?
Yeah, move those.
Okay, thank you. All right, Bex, you noted that? If Becca wants to come in now with the action sheet and take us through it, please, that would be brilliant.
Thank you, Chair. So, as you will see, there are 3 sets of responses to recommendations that are set out in the action sheet. You have received all of those responses now. I haven't received any feedback on the email, so if you do think of anything, please do email me and I'll feed that back to the exec members and the officers for further information. There are 3 outstanding actions then. There's the update on the progress of the 21-bed care facility, the DFG wait time and the number of complaints on care. I have chased those up again for you this week, so hopefully I'll get all that information to you by the end of the week.
Thank you, Rebecca. Now we're going to go on to agenda item 6. But before we start our discussions, I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome Dave Leach, our Strategy Director for Communities and Digital. We were expecting Councillor Cross, but I understand she's ill. So we also welcome Emma Davis-McIntosh from the United Bevan Health Board to the meeting. Emma may be new to some of our councillors, so shall we go through a short introductory, so Emma to know who she's dealing with. Shall we start with Jane, please?
Yeah, good morning. So I'm a relatively new councillor in the ward of Fairwater.
Linda?
Good morning. I'm councillor for the Abersecon Ward, community councillor for Vartig and Gandyfeth.
And Lucy?
Hello, I'm the Borough Councillor for Upper Cumbrian Ward.
Steve?
Yeah, I'm also the other member for Upper Cumbrian Ward.
Mark?
Yes, good morning. Councillor Mark Jones, new councillor in the new ward of Pontypool Vale.
Rose?
Good morning, I'm Councillor Rose Seaborn. I'm in the Fairwater Ward. I'm also the presiding member of the council.
And I don't know if Alfie's in. Is he in the chamber or online, please, Bex?
No, he's not present and he doesn't appear to be online, Chair. Sorry.
Okay. And Emma, I'm Jan Jones. I'm the board member for Bernavon and chair of the Healthy Committees. So I welcome you to our meeting. If Dave is available, I'll ask Dave now to hand over to him and give us a brief report on the issues before we start our questioning procedure. So if Dave is available, welcome, Dave.
Thank you, Chair. I'm in the chamber today, so you may not have seen me on screen.
I do apologise. I knew you were about somewhere. So if you'd like to start your report before we start questioning, Dave, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, no problem at all. So the report before members today relates to our approach to community resilience and particularly the initial stages of our thinking around a community wellbeing strategy. So this will become a key focal point, certainly for the Communities and Digital Directorate, but it's an approach that we're looking to embed across the council. And it's something that's cross-cutting not only within the healthier arena, but also some of our environmental actions and some of our economic and skills actions and further afield as well. And that approach really is about how we can work more effectively with our communities, not only to design and engage and consult on services, but also to deliver some of that service provision. And also to make sure that the right people are doing the right parts of that journey, because traditionally there's been a lot of activity that's been done by public bodies where we haven't engaged with our communities around the extent to which we should be doing that and how we can work more closely with our communities to deliver it. So that is what the focal point for the community wellbeing strategy will be. That's the aim, if you like, around what we're trying to achieve there. And what you presented with in the report today, and this is the first of, I hope, 2 reports to come to members of this committee as we progress through this. At this stage, you're presented with an overarching vision for that community strategy and 6 objectives. And I can talk through some of the types of activity and types of work streams as we progress through. But at this stage, it's very much around those objectives and that vision. I'd like then, if possible, to bring a further report to members once we've got a draft that's got clearer actions in, which will be developed, obviously, off the back of your comments today. So that's the next stage in terms of progressing this forward. And I won't dwell in terms of too much detail on those, but the 2 key bits really to draw out are the wording for that proposed vision, which is that Torfaen Council values the crucial role that our communities play in supporting the wellbeing and independence of residents, will embrace the passion and knowledge that our communities have about their local area and design our services with our local community at the centre. Working together, we'll tackle early and head-on the issues that make the biggest difference to wellbeing, resilience and independence. And as part of that, this is about how we integrate and apply that approach across all of our partners within the borough as well. And I'm really mindful that Emma's kindly joined us today. The strong interlinkages between this approach and the work that the Health Board are doing in this field too. So it's critical to the success of this that we get the alignment right between the work that we're doing and the work that the Health Board are doing. And I think hopefully through the conversation today, you'll see that strides have been made to do that. And then the second point I draw your attention to just briefly is those 6 proposed objectives to deliver that vision. We've got the first one around community leadership and operating at place. That's very much around how, at an individual community council level, we can start to tease out what role the borough, the community council and the community should play in those wellbeing priorities that have been identified within that area. Building resilience through the Connect network. This is our proposal here to create essentially a network of community organisations and groups so that they're there to support each other, as well as the support that we can provide to them and our partners in TVA can provide as well. And that's really important in terms of conveying wellbeing information. So in terms of the remit for this committee, one of the actions that we'll be looking to secure through that network is getting wellbeing information out directly to our residents through that network. The third then is around personalised wellbeing information in the council's front door. How do we make sure that people have easy access to information that can improve their own wellbeing so that they don't necessarily need to become a service user? And that's very much one part of the jigsaw. Fourthly, community-led prevention, advice and assistance. This is about when someone does need that little bit of extra help beyond that information that's out there, how can we make sure that we're working with our communities to deliver that preventative approach and that advice and assistance so that it's not always driven by a council-designed service provision, so that the communities are more integral in what's offered. Fifthly, coordinating volunteering. We know there's some great volunteering work. It was brilliant, actually, to hear all members talking about the volunteering that you do. And we know that there's a lot of that goes on, but we also know there's a lot more work to do in terms of how we coordinate and corral that together in a more cohesive way so that an individual in Torfaen knows where they should go when they want to volunteer, and that so organisations who may be struggling to recruit volunteers can get some peer support from others and from organisations like TVA so that they can run campaigns to boost those numbers. And finally, as I've mentioned already briefly, this is about a whole system community approach. If we're looking to apply this approach to improve wellbeing and secure wellbeing information, then it can't just be the council delivering this and taking this approach. It needs to be something that we go out and sell and champion and work with our partners on to make sure that we're all delivering this approach together. So those 6 objectives are what will drive an action plan that will come out, obviously, to members in the next session that we hopefully discuss on this. I'm looking forward to your question.
Thank you, Dave. Before we start our questioning, does Emma have anything to say that she wants to bring to the meeting?
I think just to add that Dave and I have been working very closely together, building on the work that the Integrated Wellbeing Network programme has delivered over the past 3 years. And I think, it's been a journey of almost a year now where Dave and I have been developing the strategy. Very much linked to some of the work we've done in Blaenavon and elsewhere. So I'm just really pleased that this report has been collated and that the local authority is adopting this strategy. And I think we do have a little bit more work to do in terms of engaging the wider partnership around this approach, and I include the Health Board very much in that. And I will be continuing to work with health colleagues and the wider partnership to roll out this approach as far as we can.
Thank you, Emma. As I said, we had a pre-agenda meeting yesterday and members have put together a series of questions. So if you all are happy, we'll start our questioning now. And as Alfie is not in the meeting, can I ask Steve to take Alfie's questions, please?
Sorry, Chair.
Alfie is in, Chair. Alfie's in now.
Sorry, Janet, I had a problem. I had to join late.
That's all that matters. The first question comes from myself. Community wellbeing strategy. What is the timeline for producing this? Who will be involved in its development?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in terms of the timeline for this, so what you're presented with, as I say today, is the first report looking at the vision and the objectives. And we've done a lot of work so far with Torfaen Voluntary Alliance, with the Health Board, and that's the world that Emma works in within the public health sphere, but also primary care within the Health Board as well, and with our town and community council colleagues as well. In most cases, we haven't managed to arrange meetings with all town and community councils yet. Some have been a bit more delayed in terms of whether they're willing to bring us into council to discuss the approach at this stage. But there's been quite a lot of work and engagement gone on with those partners at this stage. The next stage then is to pull this information together into a draft document that we then take out physically, and this isn't just an online consultation in a traditional sense, we take out into those community groups that you're all working with and that we know are operating within our area. And Emma and her team have done some great work, particularly in Blenavon, but it's spreading now across the other parts of the borough, to look at mapping who those community groups are, how they interrelate, and what the outcomes are that they're looking to achieve, what's important for them, and how they can stimulate those conversations. So we've already got a good start in terms of which groups to go and speak to. So that process of actually doing that engagement and drawing up that draft document to go and speak to groups about will probably take us the first quarter of the coming year, so January to March, essentially. At that point, then, we'll be looking to bring it into members, into council for adoption. So I would hope that this would be in for adoption certainly by summertime.
Thank you, Dave. Dave, can I come in? You're working with community councils, but what is your involvement with the individual ward members?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So we started conversations with ward members before the election on the vision and the approach that we were taking there. So several ward members may have had that conversation with us. That was paused as a result of the election, and it hasn't picked back up again. So it's a really good point, something that we are mindful of and haven't forgotten about. That will be introduced at the same time as we're doing that community engagement as well. And what we were doing, and the approach that we'll take again, is systematically going from the top of the borough down, having conversations around, in the same vein that we've had with the community councils, which is essentially, what are your priorities from a community wellbeing perspective? Importantly, where you believe there is a role for ourselves, partners, the community councillor and the community itself. So what are the priorities in that sense for your local area? And then what does the community infrastructure look like in your local area? So what groups, clubs, organisations have you got? And we'll be asking ward members to challenge us on the principles as well. So today is a brilliant first opportunity for that challenge and critique of that vision and those objectives. But we'll be continuing to iterate that as we have those discussions with ward members. So again, that will happen in the January to March period.
Thank you, Dave. As I said, I've been fortunate to meet you in Blenavon, but I know some of the newer councillors haven't had that opportunity, so I welcome that. So thank you. Emma, is there anything you want to add to that before we go on to our next question?
I think just the one thing that we as a programme are obviously now looking at our objectives and our delivery for 2023-24 and very aware that this strategy is now in development and some of the things that will fall out of this strategy are potentially an exit strategy for our work, which it obviously makes us think about where we prioritise our actions over the next 12 months and beyond, because our programme has funding for the next 4 years. So I've tentatively had a discussion with Dave and some others about facilitating a workshop in January with key partners to ensure that they shape our work programme moving forward and continue to ensure that alignment. Where can we add value rather than just continuing to do what we've done in the past 3 years? I think potentially we now need to pivot now towards closer alignment to this strategy. And that involves a change for us. So we're aware of that and we will be having those conversations over the next few months.
Thank you. Linda, I think you've got the next question if you'd like to come in, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we're looking at paragraph 3.1, where it states that you'll be informed by the best data, insight and business intelligence. So I just want to know a bit more about what data you will be sort of gathering and using to actually evaluate community strengths and weaknesses on a smaller locality level. And the thought came into my mind when we were reading it that we need to sort of set some benchmarks at the beginning of the process so that we can evaluate progress as we go through this very different way of working in communities. So could you tell us a bit more about that, please?
Thank you, Councillor Carlton. Yeah, of course. If I pick up that question around the baseline and the benchmarks first, so there is some information, granted not all of what I'm sure members would expect to see in terms of an evaluative framework, but there is some information contained in this report around some baseline data, and that will be really important for defining the change that we want to see and how we're going to monitor and track it going forward. Where we're still working through it, because if I'm honest, I don't think this part of the data exists in the format that I would want, is the more sort of community capacity, community cohesion style data. Because it's very fluid, that sort of data, and it's not the sort of thing that you can always map in using traditional methods on a map. So what we're developing, and we're developing this with Cardiff University through the Infuse programme, so our officers are working with Cardiff University on it, is essentially a social capital map that pulls all sorts of data streams from public sources, things like our residence survey, things like demographic data, things like crime statistics, for example, and it pulls it all together to build up a picture of where we feel certain areas are more likely to engage with different topics in terms of that community cohesion and infrastructure, and where we feel that we might need to channel some of our early intervention and prevention resources. Now, this has never been done before to this extent, a social capital map, so this is new, this is in testing. I'm reserving judgment until we've tested that approach, but we are looking to do that, but we're not just going to rely on that. So alongside of that, one of the conversations, and some members will be familiar with this, one of the conversations that we've started to have with community councils, and we will be having with ward members, is about testing what that community capacity looks like within your area. So within each community council, we want to build up a picture of what all of the community groups look like. We can then understand what outcomes they're delivering. And once we understand that, we can put a measure against that to say, right, that's what your ability to deliver within your community capacity against certain outcomes. So if we're saying, for example, we want the community in Blaenavon to be more involved in healthy ageing, then we will have an understanding of all of the community groups who have healthy ageing as a focus, and we can make a judgment then as to whether there is enough capacity within that community, or whether we need to do more to build capacity, or whether we just need to support that capacity and help it to grow. So all of that data side of things will filter in once we get to the action planning stage. Now, that is why it's so critical that we do the engagement with yourselves, with community councils, with community groups over the coming months, because you have that knowledge of what groups are in your areas and what those groups are looking to achieve. And without that, it's very, very difficult to statistically start to put some facts and figures on how we're going to show whether we're making progress. Just one last thing on the data side of things. We've also then drawn in some of the more traditional data sources around some of the outcomes that we're looking to achieve here. So things like local, the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation, which goes down to an LSOA level, which is a very, very local level, much smaller than a ward. We're pulling all of that data in, and when we're having conversations with community councils, we're then going back out to say, this was your assessment, this is what the data says. Do you want to change your assessment? Do you still agree that that's the situation based on what the data says? We're also fortunate now, final one, to have started to get access at an MSOA level. So that's usually slightly bigger than a ward. It's probably 2 wards normally of a scale from the new census, so from the 2021 census. So we've had the release of that data now relating to demographics. That's really important, because when we're looking at things like healthy ageing, we need to understand how the age profiles of each community has changed. And that demographic data is starting to enable us to do that. So by the time we come to do the proper engagement with community groups, and we've got a draft document there to be talking through with people, all of that data will be filtered in at a very, very local level. There's no point in us doing it generically across the borough, because the priorities, the demographics in Blaenavon will be very different from Thornhill, very different from Pontypool Town Centre, for example. So we'll do it on a place basis.
Thank you, David. That explanation has been very helpful. That's already tied in some of the sort of questions I had in my mind. This obviously being very new, that sounds like a lot of officer time. Are we okay from that perspective?
Yes, so most of that data analysis is work that we'd be looking to do to align to the county plan anyway. So members will be familiar with the county plan. Obviously, it was brought to council recently. A lot of the objectives within that county plan link to this strategy. This hasn't been developed in isolation. This is a part of that county plan strategic framework. So there will be a case of saying, right, if we're monitoring it for county plan, then we'll filter it down for this. So it will be officer time, but it will be officer time that we'd already been committing anyway.
That's great. Thanks ever so much. Very helpful.
Thank you, Dave. I think Lucy'd like to come in to ask some questions. Lucy, do you want to come in, please?
Not so much a question, just adding to what you said. Yeah, just an observation. I think it's really good that you highlight the fluidity of the data. So I think in my mind, and just to sort of see if you think if that's right, it's getting both the qualitative and the quantitative data before us. And I know in another scrutiny meeting, and you've already done this in the report, is using actual narratives, actual case studies, which can reflect things often much more clearly than just, kind of like statistics and factual data. So I think if that qualitative narrative is always included, I think that's a really helpful way of capturing, live situations. That's all the comment I wanted to make.
Thank you, Lucy. Steve?
Only following on from that, with the necessary data collected during the COVID, that data needs to be flexible because people's concepts have changed and what they wanted before COVID. So how would that integrate with the data?
Sorry to interrupt, Councillor Evans. Sorry to interrupt. We've just had a fire alarm test in the chamber. So can you start again? Sorry, because Dave won't have heard your comments.
Well, that's good because I sit on a fire. Yeah, just to ask, with the data, with the COVID, when COVID come in, people's priorities changed and what they wanted within the communities. So how would that data be flexible when we're looking at it now to make our clear objectives going forward?
Yeah, both really good points, yourself and Councillor Williams. And I think it goes to the crux of what Councillor Williams was saying, that we'll always be able to access statistical data. Some of that will become fairly out of date. If you take the census data, they're done every 10 years. The releases drip feed probably over another 2 or 3 years afterwards. We're fortunate that when we're planning this, we've got some very, very recent census data, but that is just good fortune. Other data, like the wind, is probably on a 5-year cycle. And some of the data that we collect from a performance perspective is either annual or live data. So there'll be different data streams coming in that will show how the picture is changing slightly, but it's the qualitative work that will tell us actually something dramatic has happened that the data isn't yet going to represent. So say, for example, you lost 4 community groups in Thornhill. All of a sudden, for whatever reason, those community groups disbanded. That's really important for us. We need to track and monitor that. But that's not going to be picked up in any traditional data sources through WIMD or anything. So that's where the continuing conversations with yourselves, with community councils and with those community groups is really important. And we'll be keeping on top of that. So one of the suite of tracking measures that we'll use for the strategy as we go forward is the number of community groups that are operating, that are part of this Connect network. And we'll be able to monitor that live to see whether things are coming or going. And then we can pick up those qualitative conversations about what's this actually mean? Because the data is pointless unless we've got the analysis right. We've got loads of data. We're very, very data rich as organisations. But what we need to make sure is that we've got the analysis of that data right. And that's where the qualitative lens for it will really kick in. So it's something we're mindful of. Hopefully you can see we're mitigating the risk of that by looking at that qualitative approach as well.
Thank you, Dave. If everyone's happy, we'll move on to our next question from Alfie, Councillor Alfie Best. Do you want to come in, Alfie?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My question is relevant to 3.7.1 in the report, and it's when asked whether the community was in a position to influence decisions affecting their local area, only 26.1% said they felt they could.
Sorry, Councillor. We've got another fire alarm set. If you could just hold on, we'll let you know it's finished.
No worries.
Thanks, Geraint. Sorry, Alfie.
That's right.
Okay, Councillor Best is finished now, thank you.
So
I'll send you.
it's 3.7.1 in the report, and it's when asked whether the community felt they were in a position to influence decisions affecting their local area, only 26.1% felt they could. Has anything further been sought to help determine why this figure is so low, and what can be done to improve this? And also, do we have any comparisons for previous years to assess whether this is deteriorating?
Yeah, really good question. It has deteriorated. It was higher in previous years. We've just received the resident survey, the final submissions for that. So the data analysis of that is ongoing at the minute. So we should have, within the next, I would say, month, a revised figure for this year going forward. Now, the trend has been downwards for that, with people not feeling able to influence what goes on. To a degree, some of that is around national issues. People will conflate what a local authority is doing with what's happening in the bigger picture. And if people feel disempowered in general, then the response to that question isn't going to be as positive. But the important thing for us is that we try and, understanding where those national trends are, we try and stop that continuing to decline and start to move it backwards onto an upward curve. And in terms of what we're going to be able to do about that, one of the lines that I quite often say when I'm talking about this is that if you've got a community where we haven't been tackling the core problems linked into deprivation and well-being, and we haven't been engaging with that community, then that community will start to feel disempowered. And when a community starts to feel disempowered, that's when you'll start to see more demand coming into those services. And that's where you'll start to see more disillusionment with those services, because people are saying, well, what's the point? You're not listening to me. Those services aren't designed around what I want to achieve. So the objectives that we've built into this strategy are very much around tackling those core problems. We're going to look at what we can do around deprivation. I don't like the phrase tackling deprivation, because it's something that we just have to try and manage. We have to try and improve the situation for people who live within our area. So that's one major focal point around our early intervention and prevention. The other focal point then is around building the Connect network, so making sure that we've got organisations out on the ground where people feel like if they go in there, they can get access to information quickly, and they can then shape what that information is going to be going forward into the future. Stimulating those conversations amongst the community is another really key part of that. And then the final part for me that's critical to this is that place leadership. The further away from a place you go, the more people feel detached from that service. And that's one of the key reasons that we're working so closely with community groups and community and town councils on this approach. And we're really keen to do that, is because that place leadership has to happen at the most local level possible. Because it's only then that people can actually engage with that local community and have that fleet of footness to be able to adapt to those changes that are being put forward. So if a community comes forward and says, actually, these are the challenges that we're facing, the work that we're doing with town and community council should be flexible enough to adapt to that, whereas larger strategies may not be in a position to do that. So we're very mindful of that trend. It will be one of the key indicators for us going forward, is can we start to improve on that trend. But I think it's a complicated picture of various different components, all of which the strategy is designed to improve.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. Cheers.
Okay. Are you okay with that, Alfie, or do you want to have any other questions?
No, that's great. Thanks for the answer.
Right. Councillor Lucy Williams has our next question.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, it actually follows on very logically, I think, from this from Councillor Best's question, and it's specifically around this Connect network, because reading through the report, this is obviously quite a very important tool in achieving these objectives. And there was an example given. It was in 3.7.2, which said it was going to be this Connect network is going to be a prerequisite for communities wishing to, for instance, to access the Warm Hub scheme, that they sign up. So just if you can maybe explain a little bit more what the Connect network looks like and how you're going to disseminate information to community groups so that they can make effective use of it?
Yes, of course. So there's two things that complicate this. We have a platform at the minute that's been operated by Torfaen Voluntary Alliance called Connect Torfaen. So the data that you've got in 3.7.2 relates to the organisations who are already signed up to that Connect Torfaen platform. But what we're actually looking to do is move that beyond just an online platform that we've got where people can sign up and put up their activities to something that becomes a real focal point for getting information out to our communities around wellbeing and how community groups can help improve people's wellbeing. So I would see this moving from being just the platform to the platform being one tool linked into a wider physical network of community groups. And a lot of the work that Emma's team in the Health Board have been looking at is connecting these groups together so that they start to have those conversations already. So it's probably been a bit confusing, and I apologise for that, for me talking about a Connect network as an aspiration and Connect Torfaen, which is already running. But the Connect network that I'm talking about is an evolution of that Connect Torfaen, taking it to the next stage. In terms of how we actually get that information out to that network, the platform will be what helps us do that. So when people register to be a part of a Connect network, the platform will at least allow us then to know all of the groups who are signed up to this approach. And when I say signed up to an approach, and this is important in terms of that prerequisite component, what we're asking our community groups to do here is help contribute towards some of those activities at place that we're saying are really important for that local area. So as a council, what we'll be going out and speaking to our communities about is these are the challenges that we and your community council have identified within your local area. The support that we provide to you, we're going to be asking you to help us address those challenges, for your community to take an active role in addressing those challenges that are happening at your local level. And what that means is when we get support coming in through, say, warm hub schemes, but it can be a plethora of other things in future years, we've got a network that we can channel that out to, and we know that we can then say these are the outcomes that we're looking to achieve. And that will influence things like the third sector grant programme as well. It'll all be linked into those outcomes that we're trying to achieve at place. Now, there are some risks around that. There will be many, many community groups who members will work with who will say, well, actually, that's not what we want to do. That's fine. This approach isn't about stopping that community activity on the ground. It's about working with those groups who do want to help to deliver some of those strategic objectives that we have at place in probably a more coherent and consistent way, so that we're actually making sure that the activity that those groups are doing, they've got the opportunity to influence what happens at their local area. Because what quite often happens now, it might help if I give an example of this, we'll have some groups who are really, really keen on environmental activities and cleaning up a particular area. But if they were networked together with other groups, we could do that as a much more coordinated approach across a whole place, linked into what the specific problem was. So instead of one group cleaning up dog fouling and one group cleaning up litter, we could do a concerted effort on dog fouling if that's what the data says the priority is within that area. And those groups would be more than willing to do that. They just don't have that coordination at the minute because we don't have the infrastructure set up to help coordinate. So that's what the Connect network is about. It's about having community groups much more joined together and much better connected into us.
Thank you, Dave. Lucy, has that answered your question?
Yeah, maybe just a sort of a suggestion or a comment. So I guess what we could already do as borough and community councillors is to already encourage the groups that we're involved in to sign up to the existing TVA Connect Torfaen platform as a start, so that you've got, more information, and then hopefully that will help with the evolution of taking it to a more physical connection.
That would be superb. That would be very helpful.
Thank you, Dave. Emma, do you want to come in before I invite Rose, please?
Yeah, just to add that if you'd like to see an example of this kind of thing in practice, what you have at the moment being led very much by Tasty Not Wasty at Llanrafn Church, if you look at their recent, you'll see it more more prominently on social media, but actively outside of social media as well, the hub network that they are part of, and they're very much leading in relation to the Christmas surplus food. So that originated when we started to bring together a group of people that we called COVID-19 champions during the pandemic, and we made a lot of introductions across various groups across the whole of Torfaen who were delivering the same kind of thing. I mean, we very much made those introductions and stepped back and then just watched that happen. And what you see now is this whole network, and I think there's about 14 hubs that Tasty Not Wasty are working with to make sure that that delivery of Christmas surplus food is coordinated across the patch. So I think that's a really good example of the kinds of things that can be achieved on across a whole range of issues, just with nudging and light touch support from public services. We are there in the background supporting this movement, but the communities and the volunteers themselves are actually getting on with it.
Thank you, Emma. Rose, do you want to come in? And then Steve, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to, there's a vast variety of all different groups out there. Are we looking to engage as many as possible, or is it only certain ones that pertain to health and well-being? I mean, you can say a sports club, is a health and well-being club. So are we looking to include everybody that is out there in our community?
It's a very good question. As many as possible, but we'll have to be focused because there's so many. In terms of actually getting around and speaking to groups, what I don't want to do is for us to quite simply run out of time. It could become a perpetual cycle because groups come and go. By the time we've got round everyone, some of the ones who we spoke to first may have disappeared. So what we're hoping to do is when we've done the work with the community councils around priorities, so wellbeing priorities, we'll then focus our efforts on where the community is helping deliver those priorities. So it may be, as an example, conversations we've had this week in Pontypool Community Council area emphasised youth activity, healthy ageing and the environment. It's groups who are operating in that sphere that we'll focus on first, and the ask I've put to Community Council members in Pontypool is, can you come back to me with the list of groups who you think are contributing to those outcomes? So we'll do those first in terms of this initial engagement. But if there are others who members feel that we should be speaking to, who might be missed out by that approach, let me know and we'll be more than happy to speak to them directly.
Thank you, Dave. Steve, do you want to come in? Emma, do you want to come back in, or is it your legacy hand?
No, it's just a very quick one on that point. In terms of the concept of health and well-being, everything is in, because the concept of well-being is huge. Everything in your life affects your well-being, whether that's your income, your relationships, your housing, etc. And so any community group actively bringing people together, because being social, being connected is impactful on well-being, is in terms of as far as the whole concept is. Obviously that's limited then by priorities and capacity, but just to answer that question that Councillor Seaborn raised, every community group is relevant to this regardless of what they are involved in.
Thank you, Emma. Steve?
Yeah, just to carry on from Tasty Wasty, I work closely with Tasty Wasty anyway, but it's not just a Christmas thing. They've been doing it all the way through COVID. But regarding the well-being things for ourselves, we've done pantomimes, we got various other things. It's not just about food, sometimes there's other things. We've done trips to Western, Barry, St. Fagans, the Christmas markets through funding. But the only thing I do find, collaborating with some of the others, is about sometimes there's lack of information and lack of help, particularly on the financial side when we're looking to support some of these groups. I mean, we have to find out through third parties, and sometimes we need to be told as soon as to make sure we're able to support the residents within our communities as quick as possible and not be delayed by things. I think it's vitally important we move quicker than we are, because we seem to be very laboured in some of our approaches.
Okay, I think that for me is what the network will help with. We don't have the infrastructure at the minute to do that, to get that information out quickly. That's what the network will help with. But in terms of a prioritisation, where we'll be asking TVA and partners to focus in terms of getting that information out, is information that tackles the gaps within that particular area. So you can appreciate we get hundreds and hundreds of requests from groups around activity, but if that activity isn't something that's tackling the wellbeing problems at that area, it would have to be, in my view, a lower priority for us to be prioritising, because we want to be supporting those groups who are very, very focused on those wellbeing priorities within that area. So we'll try and get as much out there as possible, but if we do have to prioritise, we look at using those locally based plans around those locally identified outcomes as the focus for that first.
Thank you, Dave. Right, members, we have quite a few more questions to go, so should we move on? Our next question is coming from Councillor Linda Clarkson. Linda.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm looking at 3.7.3 and sort of expanding on the issues of the fluidity and the pure scale of this, and looking at what's already in place, the Torfaen Connects. So, you know, Torfaen Voluntary Association have already got 280 local volunteer groups and organisations registered as members. So the question being from that is, how often is this membership reviewed to ensure that it is accurate and reliable? That's quite a task in itself. I'm not aware of any mechanism for groups to be able to say we're disbanding or, you know, we're having problems, so that anyone can step in and help them not getting to the stage of disbanding. So the other question is around how we're engaging with the members that they've already got. How have they supported groups, and sort of what numbers have they actually supported to date? And how is it going with their helping to recruit with volunteers currently? Because that might give us some more insight into the issues that we're going to have going forward by looking at that information and what we're already sort of doing and managing to achieve. So I'm sorry, that's quite a big question with a lot of information that you may not have all of it as it's in TVA's remit, but I just feel it's something important to look at what's already currently happening and what the challenges are, so that we can take those sort of lessons and go forward.
Yeah, no problem at all. And please do jump in if I miss anything here. In terms of that, the first point around how do we make sure that we've got the groups talking to each other, how's it actually working in practice, basically, and how do we make sure that groups aren't dropping off? The platform, and part of the reason for me saying that we need to evolve this approach around the Connect platform, the platform isn't perfect. At this stage, it's still very reliant on community groups registering. There is no deregistration process at the minute, so it's reliant on our knowledge as officers on the ground as to what groups are or aren't active and what activities they're doing. And whilst we can do that, that's very resource intensive and probably isn't a sustainable approach. So as part of the evolution of that Connect network, we will be looking at, is there a more efficient way that we can do that? The answer may be no. This problem has been looked at many, many times in terms of wellbeing information. The answer may be that is the most efficient way of us doing it. But we do want to take a look at that and really scrutinise that. In terms of volunteers and what volunteer activity we've got at the minute, TVA will hold that data, but I'm sure we can get that to members on the committee. One of the challenges that we've got at the minute is how do we make sure that when someone comes forward as a volunteer, they're quickly put in touch with those groups who need volunteers in a way that aligns to the skill set of that individual. So the whole objective around volunteering here is about improving that flow. Because at the minute, the flow doesn't work in the way that ideally we would like it to. And this isn't ascribing blame to anyone within the system. The system isn't working. Somebody can turn up at the council. They could be recruited by one of our coordinators, the old role that Rosie Seaborn did, but work that goes on in Bridges into Work, for example. They all recruit volunteers. They could turn up directly at a charity themselves, or they could turn up at TVA. They could turn up at various points within that system, and they'll get a very different experience as a volunteer depending on where they turn up within that system. What we've got to have, in my view, is a volunteering system where everyone is channelled into that TVA source to do that initial coordination, initial data handling, initial support of that volunteer, and then do the placement of that volunteer out with the community groups and others who need their support. So we've got a lot of work to do around volunteering, but on the data side, I'm sure, and I can ask on behalf of members, I can ask TVA to provide some additional data around that. There is some information around the volunteering programmes that we run within the council, and this just goes to show this, partly the scale of the problem, that we've got 4 programmes there, all of which are recruiting their own volunteers at the minute. Now, I'm not saying that should stop. They're all doing brilliant work, but I'm saying that's not collected or coordinated centrally anyway yet. That had to be conversations between different officers, and a volunteer on the Fusion project might be able to help Blaenavon Workman's Hall, for argument's sake. It's an arts and cultural project. The sort of person who would volunteer for that may be the sort of person who would want to work within a cultural organisation. But because we don't have all of that filtering into a single source, we're not making those connections. I don't know if that answers all of your question, Councillor Clarkson.
It's sort of we're still at the concept stage, aren't we? But it's just the thought that if we can identify where the sticking points and the problems are in the now, it may help us sort of going forward with overcoming some. This is a huge task, basically, and we can see the complexity of it. So as a first point at this stage, it's just trying to look at how we get to the next one, really. But yeah, that does answer those questions. But how well we're sort of coping in the now does seem relevant to how we go forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can certainly provide more information on how that flow's working now. There is some work that's been done with Emma, myself and Amy at TVA to start mapping what that flow looks like at the minute and where the pressure points are in there. And I think it's probably fair to say we've certainly got a pressure point around marketing. We simply don't have as many volunteers coming through the formal schemes as we would want. We also have a pinch point around some of the bureaucracy, if I can put it like that. Do we need all volunteers to be doing the same checks as one another? Probably not. The scale of a check that you will need to be a volunteer picking up litter in a town centre that's pedestrianised is very, very different from the scale of volunteer that you need to work in a clinical setting within the NHS and everything that goes between there. So we need to understand exactly what our routes are for volunteering, but we know that that's another pinch point. And then we know there's a pinch point around coordination. And how do we actually coordinate that volunteer experience and help to place volunteers out into community groups? We know we've got lots of groups who are crying out for volunteers, and we also know anecdotally there are a lot of people who want to volunteer. So that matching activity isn't happening yet. So in terms of that customer flow, that journey, those I would say are the 3 pinch points that we've identified so far.
Well, that added information's pretty much answered the questions. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Councillor Jane Watkins. Jane, if you'd like to come in, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think you've probably just sort of started touching on this, so I don't know whether you've really answered this question. But yeah, still looking at 3.7.4, where the volunteers are all supported, in different ways by different organisations. Are there any plans to create a central database of all the volunteers? So that there's an element of coordination and obviously an ability to then signpost people to the right voluntary organisation or to the right people who can help them.
That's certainly where we want to get to. What I would say here is because we're at the concept stage, there is a lot of work for us to do jointly with Torfaen Voluntary Alliance on this to understand resourcing and capacity within TVA. TVA isn't a large organisation, and we need to be mindful that already today we've talked about 2 potential priorities for TVA, support within that Connect network of community groups and support to coordinate volunteering experience. What I think we need to become more effective at as an authority is using the financial levers that we've got to make sure that our partners' time is focused on those key areas where we say we want to work together. So instead of encouraging activity all over the place, let's focus in using the resources that we can direct at it on those 2 or 3 key priorities that we have for partner organisations. And I think from conversations I've had with TVA, having that clarity about what our expectations are of them and what funding sources we can bring to the table to help them deliver against those expectations will be helpful.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Jane?
Yes, no, that's good. Thank you.
Next question is from Councillor Clarkson, please.
Thank you, Chair.
I think it's probably been half answered.
We have touched on some of these points, specifically some of the first point. So if I just ask the question in the whole, simplifying volunteering, it seems essential that we manage to do this because of the complexity of the process that we're involved in, and if we're going to encourage people to volunteer, some are only going to be able to provide a short stint of volunteering, others are looking to volunteer for a longer time. The requirements that you've just touched on, Dave, you know, first aid training, DBS checks often, these type of things, governance. So is there sort of, are we looking outside of our organisations to look at what best practice is going on within the national sort of thing to simplify volunteering so that it makes it easier for participants coming in? And the other concern is linked into that again, that anything that's sort of reliant on volunteers is very brittle. It's a word that we've used quite a lot yesterday. Again, people's circumstances change. You know, they may become ill themselves. They can only commit so much time, or they only wanted to volunteer for a short amount of time. So some of these services that we're looking at are already struggling and sort of with the added sort of costs that are involved now with anything that sort of involves a building around it. So how are we going to guard against some of these problems where we've got great networks, we've worked out this is happening here, that's happening there, and then there's a crisis within a group that's providing a key service, and how do we step in to try and guard against that, help them with that? Does that make sense, Dave?
It absolutely does. If I take that one first and then I'll work backwards, there is a leadership role here for public bodies, for ourselves, for the community councils and town councils, for the health board and particularly for TVA, around inspiring volunteering. What you tend to find with volunteer groups is that they're very committed and passionate about a particular area. That's why they're willing to volunteer their time. But sometimes things can get on top of you. Things can get to the point where you think, what's the point? Why am I doing this when nobody values it, when we're not getting the returns that we should be getting? And that's our role, is in supporting it when it gets to that point and stopping it getting to that point by helping to raise the profile of whatever activity those people are doing. Now, we can't do that across all volunteer groups, which again draws me back to why we've got to prioritise at place around what volunteering activity is going to be best delivering those outcomes. And in terms of that reliance on volunteering being brittle, I completely agree, and that inspirational role of the public sector will help with some of that, but it's not going to stop it. We'll still get volunteer groups coming and we'll still get volunteer groups going. And that's natural. As people's priorities change, as their personal circumstances change, people will come in and out and groups will dissolve and reform. The important thing for us is that we do enough through the marketing on the volunteering side to make sure those groups are reforming. We do enough through the inspiring side to help them when they want to form, so that there's that new impetus coming through, and that we do that through the monitoring of that data. So at the local level, if we've got a series of objectives and we say 1 year, brilliant, health and wellbeing is completely covered in Blaenavon, we've got loads of groups who are doing that, and then the next year we find out, actually, do you know what, half of those groups are really struggling with volunteers, that then gives us the focus to say that's where we actually need to invest our time, because those groups are at risk, and that is important for one of the outcomes that we've prioritised within that area. So the data will help guide some of that support and some of that proactivity, because we won't be able to do it all across all volunteering routes. Just in terms of the first point then, are we looking at best practice? Absolutely. So one of the areas that members will be aware is a particular frustration is you quite often get people who want to volunteer on the public highway. People want to do litter picks. People want to help paint street signs. People want to help wash things down. That's brilliant, and we should be encouraging that. But at the same time, we do have to manage the health and safety risks of people operating on the public highway. So we've been looking at an approach taken in Cumbria, where there is essentially a form of agreement that's done with community groups, but not just passed out to a group and said, here you are, off you go, fill that in. that people fill it in together with an officer, so you can start to build at what people's appetite is, and then you can decide, okay, how far can we allow that particular group based on their particular appetite and their particular willingness to do either some of the training or take out some of the equipment. Where can we place them in terms of the public highway? Do they need to remain on the pavement? Do they need to do something in a pedestrianised area, or can they do something that involves supported traffic management? But that will come from that questionnaire with that community group to determine what the appetite of that group is to get involved. So it looks like quite a good approach that balances the risk to the council with the real issue about bureaucracy in volunteering. So there are definitely good practice examples out there. We've just got to try and apply them to a Torfaen context now.
So this again goes back to that cultural change, and will be dependent on the sort of risk aversion of sort of individual office and things. Just to give an example, recently putting some poppies up, I had a lot of requirements as to how I should go about that, you know, to protect me from the highway, when obviously I'm not going to go off a pavement where we walk on a day-to-day basis. So it is that cultural change. So how is that going to be infected within the officer group?
You're absolutely right. One of the key things to come back to with this communities approach is this isn't just the directorate that I lead that's doing this. So that best practice example came from Economy and Environment, the old neighbourhood services. They sent me that example. That, for me, is a really reassuring sign that this approach that we're talking about is starting to become embedded in people's thinking. Now, in fairness, until that approach is applied, officers will continue to apply their current way of thinking because that's what current policy says that they should be doing. So we've got to get these policies and procedures up and running quickly before we can start to change that culture. But it's really reassuring for me that those ideas are coming from other directorates which are having a much more direct impact on this.
That's good news. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. Emma, do you want to come in before we move on to our next question, please?
Yeah, just a quick one. I think you've potentially touched on this throughout the discussion you've had so far, but there's something about the difference between volunteering and just being a good neighbour or a good citizen. And I think we need to encourage that good citizenship without and letting people know that it's okay to go and do some of those things without actually telling anybody at all. You know, whether that's picking up a bit of litter in your street or checking in on a neighbour. There's lots of examples, and I think sometimes people feel that they have to be a former volunteer to go and do some of these things, and they don't want to be a former volunteer, so they don't do some of these things. So it's about that cultural shift and telling people, yeah, it's okay, you know, do your own risk assessment, go and help somebody out, encourage people in your community to help look after your own space and your own neighbours. And we've had some conversations about that, and so that is something that we're thinking about as well.
Thank you, Emma. I'm sure it's a lot of basic common sense, because most of us communities, we are more community orientated. We automatically do that as a matter of course, but it's something which we should get out to the public. Councillor Rose Seaborn, you have the next question, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I've added a few things as I'm looking at my question here, so bear with me. A number of volunteers are working on projects that provide them with the skill and or training. I can mention safeguarding training, health and safety, food hygiene, etc. Lots of organisations have staff shortages at the moment. And the question is about a pathway into a job, and how will you take this into consideration when developing the strategy? A job helps everybody's well-being because they've got money coming in, and it's a start as well as a house over their heads. So how are you going to draw all those strands together? Because volunteers have a mindful of experience and information, and, you know, possible CV writing could help them, and we do that in volunteer groups, and I wonder how we were going to bring this into the strategy.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and one that I think we could probably strengthen. If I tell you what we're already looking at the minute, so within the economy and skills strategy that was adopted by Council a couple of months ago, there's quite a strong strand there around how we do engagement through volunteering to put somebody on that journey towards a sustainable employment. So that's using our employability programmes and our adult and community learning functions to progress someone along that journey. In this, we're talking about coordination of volunteering through TVA at a local level. What we need to do is strengthen that connection between those two, and we've started to do that, but I don't think it's necessarily strong enough and something that we'll reflect on. What we've done already is that we've brought in our adult and community learning team to design up some of the support modules that TVA offer to their volunteers, so that straight away when somebody approaches TVA, they've got that connection into the adult and community learning world, which then moves them through that cycle towards employment through the other services that we've got on offer. Where I think we can strengthen it is having a discussion with someone at the point at which they volunteer, to be saying to them, is this some support that you'd welcome or that you benefit from? I think we've got to be careful because of the conversation we've just had about bureaucracy. We don't want to be mandating that everyone who goes to TVA has to do a course on CV building, health and safety qualifications, because that will put people off. But what we need to be doing is making sure the option is made available to people should they wish to do it at that point. And that's certainly something that I'll strengthen in my thinking now going forward.
There's also an opportunity for over duplication. Obviously, if you're a sports club, you have to put volunteers through safeguarding qualifications or training. And there's a lot of sports clubs out there, so there's a lot of people doing one particular training aspect, and you can replicate that right across the borough, really. And how do we avoid that kind of duplication? Because it's costing volunteers, it's costing groups within our community money to do that training, and there is some kind of issue here where you could actually stop duplicating so many and have a course run for so many clubs at a certain time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. So when people go through the TVA route, the potential to do some of that training around safeguarding in other areas is made available to them as soon as they hit TVA, so before they've even been placed with another organisation. I think one of the aspirations of having this Connect network, and one of the reasons it's so central to what we're talking about here, is that we can then lever that network to be able to do some of this. So we can say to that network, one of the sort of asks of you as a member of that network, as someone who signs up to the charter that says you're a member of the Connect network, is that you let us know what training programmes your volunteers have done. And that way we can start to build up a picture to say, okay, Pontier Sports and Social Club, Sports and Community Club, are brilliant at doing safeguarding training. So maybe when we get a request from, Blenavon Blues, we put them in touch with that club because that club does the training already. So that network will really help us to start using data to integrate some of these organisations together. That's why it's so important. And that's why there's got to be incentives for people to join that network, because we're going to be asking a lot of people for that, asking people to send us information, etc. So there has to be that incentive that as part of that network, you get access to things like the Warm Hubs funding when it comes forward. We've got to incentivise community groups to want to be a part of that system.
Thank you, Dave. Working from experience, we've had great success with the Community Museum in Blenavon and working with TVA. And some of our students that we have gone into full-time employment. So it is a success, and it's all about working together. Anybody else want to come in on that before we move to our next question? Linda, I think you've got the next question if you want to come in, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Looking at 3.8 in your report, David, the Marmot region, the Marmot principle, this is something that we're sort of just hearing as members, and it would be really helpful and interesting to have more information on this, because it seems to be this is on a regional level, the same concept of, garnering the skills and the talents that are already in the community to make communities more resilient. And it's just about how that is going to link in the PSB sort of aspect of looking at it regionally and then feeding it down onto a local level and keeping the individuality of the locality that you've spoken about within the local authorities sort of vision and policy. So it's just, are there any risks seen of losing any focus on a local issue through the PSB down approach, and more information around how that will work really?
Yeah, this potentially sounds a bit arrogant, but I think before the discussions were happening around the Marmot region, we were already thinking about a community's approach in Torfaen. So I know that the Marmot work has been going on for a very long time, but before those discussions were happening, we were already starting to think about that and have those conversations. So I don't think there is any risk that we will lose our ability to deliver this activity locally. I genuinely don't. This is something that myself, the rest of the leadership team, and I know members are very passionate about at a local level, come what may, regardless of what's happening in the region. Where I think the regional opportunity is that there are some organisations, Health Board, police and others, who operate on a regional footprint who are equally committed to the sorts of activities that we're talking about here. So that alignment across all of those organisations who have slightly different footprints from us as an organisation is really helpful, because I keep going back to this point that we can't do this alone. If in conversations I have with GPs, with primary care, if they're not making referrals out into community organisations as part of a wellbeing information system, then the whole process loses something. And in the Health Board and others signing up to the Marmot Principles at a regional level, that helps to stop that risk. So actually, I think this is part of our risk mitigation, if anything, rather than a direct risk to us as an authority. And I would say, and I'm sure Emma would echo this, that there's been an approach for a long time around some of the wording that's used within this. This is around those wider determinants of health, those social determinants of health. And we know that a lot of the activity that we need to do as an organisation, or as organisations across Gwent, is to try and tackle or improve upon some of those wider determinants of health. What this is doing is making sure that that's clear, front and centre, that we're not doing it because we know that there's a problem in one particular area or because it links into another strategy. We're doing it because we're explicitly saying this is what we want to achieve as organisations. So I think Marmot actually, in terms of the embedding of those principles across the Public Service Board, helps this programme of work rather than hinders it. I think those principles are very well aligned to the wellbeing approach that we're taking within this strategy. And I think as the approach taken within the PSB starts to develop, I'm sure there'll be opportunities for member seminars and other engagement around how they align. But from my perspective, there's certainly an assurance here today that we won't lose the local approach that we're looking to take here.
That's great. Thanks very much.
Emma, do you want to come in, please?
Yeah, just to echo what Dave is saying, really. I mean, some of you will know that I worked for the local authority for a long time, and I used to work very closely with Dave Congreve. And Dave Congreve and I have been inspired by Marmot ever since his first report in 2010. So a lot of the work that's already been done in Torfaen, whether that's the Welfare Reform Project Group, whether that's the Early Intervention and Prevention Strategy that we were involved in, and now this community's approach, is inspired by Marmot and has been for a long, long time. So I think, I echo what Dave says in terms of we're in a very, very good place. We've inspired some of this work regionally, and the rest of them are maybe now catching up with us.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emma. Rose, I think you've got our next question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And it relates to 4.3, bullet point 1. How are you defining a community? Size, location, groups that address a specific objective. Also, communities within communities can be very different, even in the same geographical area. I mentioned the point about Fairwater or Upper Cwmbran and Crossy Kellogg, totally different communities. But when you talk about Cwmbran, it's included in Cwmbran. So
that's a really good question, and the one that probably throughout this I've been grappling with most, if I'm honest with you. When I talk about place leadership as one of the objectives that we want to be embedding in this approach, we've got to have an organisation there who can take that leadership function. And the natural organisations to do that are our town and community councils. But that's not to say that those town and community councils necessarily just cover one community. We know there's various ones within there, but we don't have a mechanism at the minute to go down on a lower scale than that. We also have to be mindful of resource implications of this. So if we're looking to support volunteering or boost community capacity at place, or connect people into their communities at place, we need to be able to have enough officers on the ground to represent that place. And if we were to do that in every ward or every lower super output area or something even smaller perhaps, it would quickly become unsustainable. So the community council footprint is probably an appropriate starting place. It's not perfect by any stretch, but it's probably an appropriate starting point for that. What I think we'll end up doing in reality is accepting that within those footprints there's probably 2 or 3 different areas that need to be treated slightly differently in terms of the approach that we take. And the data will drive that. The data will show us where they are, but it'll be one team on that community council footprint who's looking at that data and adapting their approach slightly differently. In answer to that first question of what do I mean by a community, I think the way that, and it's a little bit simplistic, I know, but the way that I've tended to describe this is if you were to move to a different house from where you live now, would you still go to the same shop? Would you still go to the same church? Would you still go to the same community groups? Once you move to the point where you wouldn't do those anymore, in my view, you've moved out into a different community. And that will change dramatically depending on where you're looking at. Somewhere like Blaenavon, you may be having to go all the way up to Bryn Mawr or all the way down to Abersychan before you've moved out of that community. It's a big area, a big territorial community there. Whereas within Cwmbran, you might find that you're actually moving to a different community if you move from St Giles to Thornhill. It may be that simple. So that's why I try and use that as a bit of a ready reckoner for what I think a community is in reality in terms of how people treat it. So we'll try and align as best we can to that, but we've got to be mindful of the need for place leadership at a community council level as well with this.
Okay, thank you. Should we move on to our next question? Sorry, I'm having difficulty with IT this morning. I think it's Councillor Williams, Councillor Lucy Williams.
Thank you. Actually, I think my question follows on quite well from that. It's very obvious that key to this approach is the central role of community councils. Just looking at even just who's present here now in Cwmbran Community Council, there's already 3 of us in 3 different wards. And I see from the report that you've had workshops with or planned workshops with 5 to 6 town community councils. Have you got some practical examples of how this type of engagement is going? And I guess the other point that I would add, that I think this is where it's a really good opportunity for borough councillors representing their wards to work with their relevant town and community council. So that's my question. What's the progress so far in engagement?
Yeah, absolutely. There has been some really good progress. If I talk you through the process that I'm going through, and Emma and myself are increasingly doing these together. So we went to Pontyr, for example, the other day and did a joint session with them, and increasingly going forward we'll be doing that jointly. But the initial workshop programme for this, so where I'm trying to get to, let me start there. Where I'm trying to get to is that for each community council or town council area, we have a clearer plan with those wellbeing priorities and the role that the community can play within it, and how we as borough and town and community council support the community to get to that point. That's what we want. 1 to 2 pages is all we're talking about here for each of those areas that sets that out. So what do we need to do to get there? Well, firstly, we need to understand what the priorities are at place. So what are those wellbeing areas where members of the town and community councils feel that we can work together to get the community more involved? That's been the focus of the first workshops that we've done. So with Pontypool Community Council a couple of weeks ago, we had a really, really good session. talking around that. And as I say, those priorities came up very clearly around youth and education, healthy ageing and environmental activity. Those were the three areas where members felt that we could work together collectively, including the community, to get the community to play a more proactive role in wellbeing activity within those. Within Cwmbran, we had a very similar conversation a few weeks ago in Cwmbran Community Council. Very, very similar outcomes, actually, although theirs had more of a focus around some of the noise pollution components of environmental activity rather than the litter and cleanliness components. And perhaps less of an emphasis around traditional education and more on adult and community learning. So shared learning within the community, people helping and teaching and supporting each other with their learning. And again, a similar focus on healthy ageing. With Hentless Community Council, very much a focus around healthy ageing within there, and interestingly around cultural development. Also, that was in Cwmbran, was around cultural development. So in Hentless, it was very much around healthy ageing. And in Pontyr Community Council, really, really good discussion the other day. I think very, very similar themes. There was a lot in the environmental and the healthy ageing components that drew people's attention. So there's some commonalities, but there's also some differences between the Community Council. So that's workshop one, is what do members feel those priorities are where we can work together. Workshop two, and we've only run this one very briefly with Pontypool Community Council last night. We haven't moved on to this stage with the others yet. Is what does the community capacity look like to help in those areas at the minute? So once we've identified those priorities, what groups have we all got in those areas to actually help deliver against those priorities? And are they ones that we feel there is capacity, or do we need to be investing some time to build up new volunteer and community groups in those areas? So that's workshop two. And that should bring us to the point then, and there'll be, I said to the community councils a bit tongue-in-cheek, there'll be a bit of homework with that, because I'll be asking all ward members at a community and borough council level to send me lists of all of the groups that you work with and what their aims are, what is it that they're trying to achieve. Once we've got that then, I think then we'll have that picture for what it looks like, and that'll allow us to do a draft single or double-sided document that says this is what our priorities are going to be, and this is how we're going to work with the community in that place. And I would hope that we can get to that place by March. That's my hope, that we can get all community councils to that point by March. Blaenavon and Cross Ceiliog and Llanarafon, we haven't yet been able to arrange to do the first workshop session. I'm very keen to do it with those community councils, and we're continuing to push for a date there to do that workshop session, because I think it's been valuable. And one of my potential asks here is if colleagues who are on community councils who've done that workshop session give us some feedback as to whether it has been valuable, and if it has, help to champion that with those other community councils who may not yet be at that point in the journey. So I know that's quite a lot of information, but I hope that helps bring to life what that engagement has been like in reality.
Thank you, Dave. Steve, I think you've had your hand up for a while, so do you want to come in, please?
Yeah. Just to reiterate on from the question Lucy had asked, what we've done in Thornhill in the community centre, we've brought the 2 community councillors onto our committee structure, which is vitally important to engage more with the community. And the second part of my question is, when previously I was a community councillor, there was a lot of integration with TCAL, which was the Torvine Association of Local Community Councils. Now, that's probably the best way to approach a lot of this, where all the community councils are engaged with each other collectively, and then able to come to you with a complete structure of what they need within their areas. So I just wonder, isn't that another approach rather than go to each one singly, or Blaenavon, Pontypool or Cwmbran? Would it be vitally better to have more together?
What we're trying to achieve here is an understanding at place. So your community infrastructure is going to be very different in different places, which is why we've done it individually. But what I do see that there being a really big role in bringing everyone together around the sort of broader problems and challenges that are happening in community council areas, because they will be consistent, some of those, particularly around one of the things I'm picking up a lot is engagement with the borough, and some of it may relate to policy, and how are we being clear enough in terms of what our policy is, so that community council members can say, actually, I don't need to ask that question. I understand what the policy is because it's really clear in front of me in terms of the flow that goes through. So you're spot on. There's a lot of challenges like that are coming up, that we do need a forum for everyone to come together. We do have that forum. And I have to say, I think the last 2 meetings have been cancelled because they've not been quorum and because of poor attendance. So, again, I would urge and reiterate members who are members of community councils to go back to the clerks and the chairs and ask for attendance at that forum, because you're absolutely right. That's a great place to raise those issues. And I'm there, the relevant executive member is there, and other officers, and I'm sure members can be there as well if we need to. But attendance has been poor at those.
Thank you, Dave. Linda, you've got the next question. I think most of it has been answered, but if you want to bring it in. And members, whilst we're having a really good meeting and we've got lots of questions, please, we must be mindful that Dave has another meeting to go to. So can we be succinct in our questioning, please? Lucy, Linda, do you want to come in with anything else?
Just briefly, some of it has already been answered by the previous two, but it's picking up on that point you just came to, Dave, about the disconnect between community councils and borough councils, and the poor attendance at the TCALC meeting. They all seem to be symptomatic of the same thing. There's a lot of variety around community councils, and we need to strengthen these bonds in some more meaningful way. It's been great having you come in and visiting as a member of Pontypool Community Council, and that's been very helpful. But I think it's something we need to investigate and look at, is talking to some of our members. They're not aware of council policies or what's already happening within the borough, let alone within the wider area. And how do we sort of, foster these links going forward, look into the future?
Yeah, this is, again, a really, really challenging area, because there's so much activity that goes on within a borough, even a borough the size of Torfaen. There is so much activity that goes on that it becomes very, very difficult to get that all out in advance. It's certainly something we'll look at. At the minute, I've been asking those town and community councils, I've been reminding them of how to raise specific queries they've got. But when I'm going along to do my engagement sessions, I'm asking just in general for any sort of broad themes like this to be raised with me, and I'll then pick them up individually with officers. So when I say things around a lack of engagement or particular policies, one that's come up a few times is speed signage, for example. That's something that's consistent across many local authorities, and we're now working on a process flow to say this is the process that needs to happen to reach a decision point around whether speed signage can be installed or not. We'll then get that out to town and community councils. So what I'd be asking of clerks and of chairs and of town and community council members is, let's try and prioritise some of the information that you feel you're not getting, because we'll never get straight away to the point where everything is coming over in a perfectly communicated way. So let's prioritise those bits where you feel it's absolutely critical you have information. And once we've sorted them, let's then move on to the next set of priorities, the next set of priorities, the next set of priorities.
Just briefly coming back, Dave, one thing that I thought it could be possible is to invite to key sort of member seminars that we hold in the borough, invite some of the community councillors along to that. The 20 mile an hour implementation would be a good example. Bronavon's housing policy might be interesting them. Can you see what I mean? And they could actually sort of catch up with the information that we're sharing with our members and be informed that way if they chose to attend.
Absolutely, I certainly see the sense in that. Let me check with colleagues that there's no restrictions as to why that couldn't happen, but I certainly see the sense.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Mark, I think you've got our next question.
Yes, I have, yes. It's 4.3 BP2. Is how will we ensure communities feel empowered to be involved in setting priorities, and then obviously follow on from that, how do we improve public engagement into all this?
Yeah, really, really good points. What we're looking to do here is, alongside this, and this is more linked into our digital first customer strategy work, we're looking at how, when we do design a service, we can actually introduce the customer more into the design of that service. So instead of designing a service that works for council processes, how do we take the starting point of what's the easiest journey for this individual to get to the conclusion that they need to get to, whether that's a yes or a no? How do we take that individual through that customer journey? So we've only got 2 service designers who are employed by the council, but we're trying to build those skill sets within teams. And what they're doing is systematically going through all of those, and there's hundreds of services that we offer as a council, but systematically going through them with the teams and starting to reflect it back from the customer's perspective rather than from the easiest process perspective. What we then need to do with each of those processes is get that out into the community and say, this is what we've been told about how this would work better for you as a customer. Is that right? Are we on the right lines? Have we made your life easier by designing this process flow? Because if we haven't, we've not done it right, quite frankly. Now, that's certainly not the same thing as saying, have we given you the outcome that you wanted? Because there will be times where, because of policy and because of other objectives, we still have to say no. But that process to reach that outcome should be as simple as possible. And that's work that's been picked up in the Digital First Customer Strategy, which is another approach that's in development.
Thank you. Okay with that, Mark? Jane, Jane, I think you have our next question. If you'd like to come in, please.
I do, yes, certainly. So yeah, still in the same paragraph, really, 4.3, bullet point 2. If communities have a role and a stake in designing and delivering what may have traditionally been seen, excuse me, as council services, how will we identify and distinguish between the services?
Between services that are council as opposed to community designs. So the starting point that I come to is that every service we offer will have a customer. Otherwise, what's the point in us offering the service? Now, that customer may be a business client, it may be a health board, as much as it may be a resident, but everyone will have a different type of customer who's engaging with that. So the starting point should be that all of those services should eventually be designed around the customer in mind. Now, for some of those, there will be, I think, to be frank, less public interest in getting involved in designing that flow and that service, because it's not something that people would necessarily see the impact on them. So what we're doing is we're starting with those really high priority, high volume call services, things like our waste service, for example. We get huge amounts of engagement around waste from the public. So we're starting to look at how we better design up the process flow for a customer when they want to raise a query about waste. And we're looking at what that flow looks like now. And there's a lot of work going on with the service designers and economy and environment around that process. So ideally, almost all of our services would have a community component within them. But it's not until we get to that service design point of view with each individual one that we'll be able to determine what the level of community involvement will be in the delivery of that service.
Okay.
Good question.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Jane. I've got the next question, Dave. How will we overcome potential barriers to a community approach? Are we at risk of becoming over-reliant on community volunteers? And this refers to paragraph 4.6.
Yeah, it's a good question, because we've already talked around the lack of resilience potentially around community volunteers. I suppose what I would say is this is about making sure that we've got wellbeing information out in the community. That's the starting point that we've got to work from, and that the community are more involved in designing and delivering those services. If there isn't the appetite or desire to get involved in designing and delivering those services, that's not to say that there won't still be public services being delivered within an area. But I think it will be a poorer offer than it could be if the community were involved. And so this, for me, is about adding value to all of those things that members raise that quite often we're in a position to say, look, that's not something that we're currently able to deliver. by getting the community more involved, it does allow us to deliver more of that. So worst case scenario, if the community aren't involved in delivering this type of activity, there'll still be public service delivered. It's just we won't be able to grow the extent of service provision within an area as much as we'd like. There'll still be wellbeing information delivered. It's just it will be done more online if we haven't got those community sessions than we would like. So that information will still be out there. It just won't be as rich and as embedded. And that's why, for me, those conversations we've had around inspiring community groups to come together, being really clear on what the focus is and monitoring the data to make sure that we know where community groups are starting to struggle is so key.
Thank you, Dave. Rose, your next question, please.
My question is about funding, and a number of community organisations and volunteer groups source their own funding for particular projects. Do we need to look at our funding model and possibly review certain streams that could support the community organisations? For example, we used to have the Welsh Church Fund, but that's been diverted possibly into another community, but we used to have access to certain amounts of funding as elected members to determine where it goes in what community.
Yeah, absolutely. The Welsh Church Fund is a bit of a unique situation insofar as we had a particular methodology for delivering that in Torfaen, and increasingly the rules around that fund have been tightened in terms of the proportion that needs to be given to certain groups. So unfortunately, that's been a change in the funding criteria or the rigorousness at which those criteria are applied rather than a decision that we've taken. But in terms of that broader point of funding, we're in a position where there isn't a large amount of funding available. What we need to do is gear that funding up to really achieve the outcomes that we're talking about at a place-based level. And at the minute, we don't necessarily do that. So at the minute, we may be funding early intervention and prevention activity that isn't aligned to what the real problem is within that particular community. And that's the same with our own in-house delivery as much as it is with the third sector grants that we issue. So one of the work streams that we're working on is a review of that third sector grant process to more closely align it to those outcomes at place. And that will mean some really, really difficult decisions, I'm sure. But what we'll do is make sure that is clear and transparent, aligned to clear early intervention and prevention outcomes, and aligned to the objectives at place that will be coming out of that work with the community councils. So there won't be, or I'm not envisaging more funding to come as a total quantum. I'm envisaging the funding that we have being used more effectively to lever the outcomes that we want.
That was my point, I think. And the Welsh Church Fund rules are actually altered to put more into the community. I think the rules altered because it was only going to a dedicated source. So thank you for that.
Okay, Alfie, Councillor Alfie Best, you've got the next question, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates to 6.1 in the report. Where it says it should be noted that a significant proportion of the Council's early intervention, prevention and community development resource is currently externally funded. What is the risk of this funding ceasing or not being long-term? And also, in light of the Welsh Government budget announcement, have you had a chance to consider the impact it might have on this community-focused work?
So the Welsh Government budget announcement is still being worked through at a finance level. Whilst we've got the base amount that's been provisionally awarded to the borough, what that base amount doesn't take into account is any potential changes within some of the specific grants that are coming forward. So that data analysis is being done at the minute by finance. So it hasn't factored that into this yet, and we won't be able to do that for a good few weeks yet until that work's been done. But I think it's fair to say there certainly are risks around that. A lot of the community development work that we're talking around here is very much focused on our Shared Prosperity Fund proposals. Now, the Shared Prosperity Fund is, I think, getting to the point soon where it will all be confirmed, which is great, but that programme will only now be for two years in essence, the balance of this year, and then 2 more financial years. So there are certainly risks beyond that. as to how we continue to use that resource. Now, my hope is that within those 2 years, we'll have developed the community capacity to such a sufficient point that we won't need as many officers on the ground to do that capacity building. But we simply can't judge at this stage how far along that journey we'll be able to get in those 2 years. So there's certainly a risk there. The wider early intervention and prevention resources, largely funded, again, either through SPF or through Welsh Government Children and Communities Grant, largely. There is a review taking place within Welsh Government of the focus for Children and Communities Grant and about better alignment of that to the health and wellbeing agenda. My hope is that that will benefit this approach rather than penalise it, because this approach is very much around preventative action to support health and wellbeing. But until we see the outcomes of that review, which has been going on for quite a while now, I'm not going to be able to say with clarity that those funds will still be available. So it's certainly a risk. If those funding streams do disappear, we would need to then look at essentially identifying what scale of early intervention, prevention and capacity building resource we'd want within the borough, and either look for external funding sources or bring it to members' attention again. But that's a big if yet. There's still a lot of work to do to get to that point.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you. Rose, you've got question 17, please.
I think that question has already been answered with Dave's preamble at the beginning. It's how the strategy would align with the county plan, and I think we've answered that one.
Thank you. Linda, question 18, or do you have anything to add on?
I'm happy that that one's been covered already in previous conversations, Chair.
Thank you. Alfie, you've got question 19. Do you want to bring that up now, please? Or do you think it's been answered in previous questions?
Yeah, if there's time, it's just a short one. In the wellbeing impact assessment, it mentions that there's a mix of incentives for volunteers and community groups. What might these incentives look like?
It's a good question that needs a lot more thought, if I'm honest. In terms of the community groups, I would certainly see it being some of the things that we've talked about previously, so things like access to warm banks, warm hubs. When funding streams like that can become available, there's an incentive there for community groups to become a part of that network. For individual volunteers, it's a really good question and something we need to think in a lot more detail about. If members will allow, I'll pick up a conversation with TVA around how best we incentivise volunteering.
Yes, I think that's important, Dave, and appreciate that. Rose, you've got question 20?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Have we identified any gaps in the community provision? Obviously, it's early days yet, and I understand that. But have we, or will we, take schools and school buildings into consideration when considering community provision?
Absolutely. So one of the work streams, because what we started to do is map out provisionally some work streams that will form the action plan behind this, because I think we need to start thinking about that while we're objective setting. Otherwise, we don't know if we've got the resources and the ability to deliver the objectives we're talking about. So we've started to think about what those work streams will be, and one that I'm quite keen to pick up is, and I don't mean this in the traditional sense, but essentially a community-focused school work stream, which is about how we better sweat the assets that we have within the school estate, but equally how the community can better help the schools. This isn't just about making school resources available to the community. This is about being clearer with community groups about the role that they can play in helping improve educational attainment and attendance. So there's a definite work stream that we're likely to be pursuing along those lines.
Okay. Thank you. Dave, you'll be pleased to know we've come to our last question. To summarise, what strategic impact will the new refined Communities Directorate and the Community Wellbeing Strategy have?
Thank you, Chair. It's always saving the best question till last.
Sorry, Dave.
In terms of the strategic impact that we're trying to have here, good for me in a few years' time, so by the end of the point that this strategy has been adopted, will be that we've improved the perception that people have of their place. We've improved people's perception that they can influence service delivery. we've reduced demand in some of our key service areas, particularly around the adult social care world, by being clearer and more upfront with our wellbeing information and having better connections from social care, but also from primary care and the health board side into the community directly. So the number of social care assessed cases we would expect and hope to go down as a result of employing this approach, or if it doesn't go down, doesn't increase by as much as the demographic trends say that it should, because obviously demand will inevitably be increasing. So ideally go down, but we'd certainly like to keep it below the trend line for where it should be. And that we've got community groups more proactively taking a role around some of our environmental activities as well. So those for me are some of the key metrics that we'll be using. The final one then is around the number of our communities who are in the bottom decile of the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation. And we're trying to lift out communities from that. Now that is a much more challenging one, because the circumstances of poverty and deprivation go beyond what a community strategy can achieve in isolation. But for me, if we get the rest of it right, that's where our ideal aim and our ultimate aim should be, moving people away from that. There'll also be metrics, because we're aligning it with the health board, that I'm sure Emma will be monitoring through the Marmot approach around things like healthy ageing, around things like healthy life expectancies, etc.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate that. Emma, do you want to come in and finalise or give a summary before we finish this meeting, please?
Yeah, just to say that we're on exactly the same page as Dave is in terms of the impact that we're trying to achieve here, and very keenly aligning this with all of the other work that's ongoing within the health board. You'd appreciate that there are huge challenges within health services at the moment at both of the primary and secondary care level, and I'm doing a lot of work with the primary care locality team to try and work through ways in which we can alleviate some of those pressures, and we share our ambition in terms of the impact that we want to have. We want to see less people accessing health services because they don't need to access them. We want our health services to be available to people who really need them and can't be supported elsewhere. So those pathways are really, really key. And if we can keep people healthy and well within their communities, supported by their communities, their family, friends and neighbours, and the activities and services that we provide locally, then that's really a place that we want to get to.
Thank you. Thank you, Emma. Thank you for Dave for attending this morning. I'm sorry it's been subject to a lot of questioning, but it's a subject we've all feel really passionate about. So I'm going to close the meeting and ask you both if you want to take your leave, where we form our recommendations. But on behalf of all the committee, may I wish you both a very happy Christmas and a healthy New Year.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the questions today as well. They've been really, really helpful and certainly given us food for thought. And happy Christmas to you all as well. I'll see you all soon.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Members, please remember that we still are being webcast. So I'll ask you to give a few minutes before the officers leave, and then we can, with Rebecca's help, conduct our recommendations, please. So Rebecca, when you're ready.
Yep, Chair, the officers have left now. So members, if I can hand over to you to formulate your recommendations, if you have any thoughts or comments before I run through some notes that I've made.
The first one I got, I don't know if I come in, Chair,
Steve, yeah.
Is how are we going to measure success? How are we going to monitor the financial impact? And how we can make sure we integrate with all the community structures?
Fine. Okay, Steve.
So,
Rose?
Can I come in there, Councillor Abbott? They're more sort of questions than recommendations. So
recommendations, yeah.
Yeah, but those recommendations will have an impact on them three. About the financial and inclusion and volunteering. See what I mean? They are interconnected though. So. Okay,
Rose, do you want to come in next, please?
Yeah, can I recommend? I mean, we're just a few members here on this committee, but it needs people to take this programme right through, and elected members are placed in a very good position to do that. And I think my recommendation would be for a full member seminar, with possibly an invite to TVA as well, to actually work out how we can promote this programme going through into our communities, and how do we report back those the information we receive back. So
Totally agree. Thank you, Rose. Linda, I think you had your hand up.
I have, Janet, yeah. I would, if it's at all possible, like to extend that invitation to the community councils, because this is very much going to be a joint effort. And I'm very mindful of the fact that in previous years there's not been a lot of joint working and partnership working in that direction. So that's something we need to take on board very quickly. I'd also like to include the Marmot work that's been going on at Nyren Bevan Health Board, because again they're key to this process actually succeeding. So I'd like to see that included in that as well, please.
Certainly. Lucy, you're next, please.
I wonder if we could recommend that that this report is brought back maybe around March, because they were saying that I think that seems to be a useful point to review where they're up to. Just simply that.
Thank you,
Just
Lucy.
to come in on that point, I know a lot of this initial work, Dave said, is taking place between January and March. So it might be that you want to postpone that slightly and have it in the summer, just before it goes to council. So as a committee, you get to see that first draft of that strategy, and comments and feedback.
Just to add to that, I think some of the I know our community councils expressed that they may struggle to get March as a date, so there may be a bit of a delay there as well.
Right,
so
okay.
Summer sounds great.
Yes, good point.
Alfie, do you have any questions? Mark, any questions?
I was just hoping there'd be regular updates on things we've spoken about today. So I know when they're developing the plan, it's not as easy as it sounds, but if we plan to meet again in the new year or later in the new year, to get an update on how things are going, that'd be great.
Thank you, Alfie. Lucy, do you want to come back in again, please?
No, sorry, I haven't lowered my hand.
I recommend that we have regular information from the TVA, which Dave said he hadn't had all information on in detail. So we really need to be mindful of having that.
Yes.
Is there? Sorry, Jack, I haven't got time to put my hand up, but.
I was just going to say I noted that as an action point if you wanted that, members to offer to provide that extra data that you asked for from TVA. I think it was in response to Councillor Clarkson's question, so I'll check.
Yeah, thanks.
Rose, do you want to come back in?
I lost my train of thought there, Chair. It was around actually information sharing, actually getting it, the recommendation on we can share, but how do we get back that information to the necessary person, whether it be TVA or whether it be Dave Leach or...
Yes. My concern on a recommendation is the funding aspect. That quite worries me. But you brought it up, Rose, regarding decisions on how we allocate the grants, etc., the third party. So that's one of my questions, please. If we can put that in the recommendation, please, Bex.
I'll note that.
Linda, do you want to come back in?
Chair, as a concern rather than a recommendation. Is that okay?
Yes, please. Yeah. Linda?
I'm mindful of there's a lot of information going to be shared between a lot of groups, a lot of people. My thought is, where is this information going to be stored and presented so that everyone can access it easily? Whether or not there's something on the council website that mentions this exciting new project or exciting new way of working, names all the partners and gives a signpost as to where people can go to access. If they want to volunteer, who do they contact? If they've got a community group, and comms to do some work on that as well, to try and help us all along with social media, to try and get this information and this concept out into the community.
Yeah, that was my point, the promoting of it. Yeah.
Promoting, yeah. And bear in mind that not everyone uses social media, like the use of getting into the libraries or our resource centres, our surgeries, etc. So a greater impact of communication, please. Bex, have you come up with anything?
Only a couple of points for you to consider, members. Obviously, this is, your decisions, what you want to take forward. I did note the point about greater involvement and working with ward members, looking at what your priorities are in your wards, your communities better, etc. And Dave did say that more work needed to be done on that area. There was also the point, I think it was Councillor Williams that raised it, about members being encouraged to sign up to the Connect network of voluntary organisations that so perhaps the exec member can do some work amongst members about to encouraging you to do that. There was also the point about strengthening engagement and work on volunteers progressing through pathways to employment. And Dave again said that needed to be strengthened, so whether you want to recommend something along those lines to the exec member, that's a priority area for you. You've already raised the recommendation about the seminar, including information on the Marmot principles. And then I didn't know if you wanted to make a recommendation along the lines. There was a lot of discussions about community councils and the relationships between the borough and the community councils and the attendance of the forum. So I didn't know, perhaps you want to make a recommendation about strengthening the relationships there.
Yes.
I think that's important.
Please.
Yes, definitely. Rose, you've got your hand up. Do you want to come in with another?
Yeah, it was the point about ward members, and I spoke yesterday about the ward profiles that we used to do. It might be because they were based around the Welsh Index of Deprivation. We had all that information in a ward profile. It was presented in a document to us about our wards, and I think that one of those documents formulated for each ward would be really useful. And then maybe the crossovers between wards as well. Look at what is good in different.
One and what's another.
Yeah.
Would that be duplicating what they're asking the community councils to do? Is the only thing we need to go back to Dave?
I don't think so.
No, I think the point about including community councillor, I think that job could be done with a community councillor and a borough councillor. Just knowing what your ward issues are, what your deprivation indices are, etc. And I think the other thing, we used to invite community councils to our members' seminars when it actually applied to them. So, the member seminar that we had just recommended, we've just asked perhaps to include the community councillors, but I think we should actually look to join up this borough councillor and community councillor by inviting them to our members' seminars, so they are learning the same about Marmot as we are at the same time.
That's something I raised. Dave said he'd look into whether we can do it firstly. There may be some sort of local government issue there, possibly.
But I don't think that is, because we used to do it. Members of community councils used to come into the council in the chamber. I remember Tom Matthews being sat in there from Cwmbran Community Council many a time. But with the Teams issue now, if we have, if they don't even have to come into the chamber, they can just switch on and have an invite to the Teams meeting to gain that information. Might be some issues around questioning, and who's allowed to question and what have you, but a member seminar isn't a decision making forum, it's an information sharing forum.
I personally see no barriers, but I think Dave's going to go off and check on that one as well, but I'd love to see that happening again.
I myself and Councillor Haller, we regularly get invited, I think every quarter, to Glenavon Council to give an update on what's going on. So that might be another form of doing it. Also, Lucy, you've got your hand up. Do you want to come in, or is it a legacy?
No, it was simply to say just following on from your comments about the seminars, I wonder if it might be worth adding in the recommendation that if there do appear to be any barriers to community councils attending seminars, that those barriers are removed.
Yes, please.
To make sure that they're because I think if there's anything stopping the communication between borough and community, they should be actively removed.
Okay, right. Anybody else now before we go back to Bex with the recommendations? Rose? I think we've lost Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, members.
Okay.
So I will formulate those recommendations for you later today and send them out for your approval.
Stuart, I'm just finishing the scrutiny. Can I bring you back in a minute?
Yeah, carry on. Obviously, we come to agenda 7. What we are subject for the next agenda.
Chair.
Okay, Rose? Right, I'll start again. We come to item 7, consideration of item for the next meeting. Rebecca, do you want to come in to us, please?
Yes, thank you, members. So apologies, just to say, you were due to have a meeting in January looking at looked after children and bringing the number of looked after children population down. However, I've been informed that the department is undergoing an inspection that very week, including the day of that meeting. So they've asked if you would mind if we postpone that meeting. So now you'll consider that item, if that's okay, in the April-May meeting. You are already very ahead in terms of items you considered. You've been a very busy committee. You've already scrutinised 4 items so far until Christmas. So the next meeting now will be on the 2nd of March. Now, at Visioning, you've selected that you would like to scrutinise the housing crisis, and that would include looking at housing support grant and home seeker policy. So are you still happy that that is an item that you would want to look at and scrutinise in the March meeting? Yeah.
Yes, most definitely.
And then we'll take that looked after children item at the April-May item, and hopefully they'll have the findings from that inspection that you can also consider as part of your scrutiny activity then as well.
I think that's ideal. Could you recommend to Jason and his team that we're all thinking of him and wish him well for the inspection, and look forward to having an update, as I said, at our later meeting. I think that's all we have now. We've had a fantastic meeting this morning, lots of really good questions. All I've got to say now is have a happy Christmas, all of you, and a healthy new year, and look forward to seeing you after Christmas, hopefully when it's a lot warmer and we could be back in the chamber having some face-to-face meetings. Thank you, Rebecca, for all you've done for us, and to get in. Thanks very much. Bye, everyone.